He is carrying a dead girl in his arms. Her name was Riko. She was 16. An hour ago she had a choice between living a small, ordinary life and dissolving into a god, and she chose to live. She chose to stay. And then a man with no power at all put a bullet through her, one step from the people who were supposed to keep her safe. So he carries her body home. To the people she died for. To the believers who had prayed for this exact outcome. And they are smiling. Not hiding it. Not ashamed. Relieved. Grateful. The weak, ordinary people he had sworn his entire life to protect, happy that the innocent girl is dead. Beside him, his best friend looks at the crowd with the boredom of a god and asks a simple question. Should I kill them all? And here is the moment everything turns. Not because Suguru Geto says yes. He doesn't. He says nothing at all. He looks at the smiling crowd, and for the first time in his life, he cannot find the answer to a question he never thought he'd have to ask. Why shouldn't they die? He didn't become a monster by abandoning his ideals. He became one by following them all the way down. We like to believe that cruelty comes from people who never cared. That the ones who hurt the world are the ones who were always cold, broken early, empty inside, missing whatever it is that makes the rest of us decent. It's a comforting story. It lets you off the hook. Because you care. You feel things. You want to help. So whatever you are, you're not that. But Suguru Geto cared more than almost anyone. He believed, sincerely, completely, that the strong exist to protect the weak. He didn't say it to sound good. He organized his whole life around it. He swallowed things that made him sick to keep ordinary people safe. And that is exactly the man who ended up dreaming of a world with the ordinary people erased. So the question isn't how someone heartless becomes a killer. The question is darker than that. How does compassion curdle? How does I want to protect everyone turn, one quiet degree at a time, into they don't deserve to be protected, without the person ever feeling the moment it flipped? Because if it can happen to the most caring man in the room, the comforting story falls apart. And the question stops being about him. To understand what broke, you have to see what he believed. Geto and Gojo were the strongest students of their generation. Two boys handed more power than anyone their age should hold. And they split on one question, a question that looks small until it eats a life. Gojo found his answer by accident. When his power awakened fully, he stopped needing a reason. Am I the strongest because I'm Gojo Satoru, he wonders, or am I Gojo Satoru because I'm the strongest? It doesn't matter. He is enough on his own. His strength points back at himself. He protects the weak because he feels like it, and not because he owes them anything. Geto couldn't do that. He needed the reason to hold. He needed the weak to be worth protecting, because his entire identity was built on the act of protecting them. Take away their worth, and there's nothing underneath. No self. Just the duty. Notice what that already means. His goodness was never about him. It was about them. It pointed outward from the start. And then there was the cost of his power. To fight curses, Geto had to swallow them. Literally put them in his mouth, described as choking down a rag soaked in filthy water. And curses are not random monsters. They are born from the negative emotions of ordinary humans. Fear. Resentment. Cruelty. Every ugly thing people feel and never say. So this is the man's daily life, ingesting, again and again, the concentrated rot of the very people he's protecting. Tasting exactly what they're made of. For years. And then the crowd smiles over Riko's body. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche had a word for what happens next. Ressentiment. Not ordinary anger. Anger discharges and is gone. Ressentiment is the wound that can't get out. It turns inward, festers, and then does something strange. It becomes creative. It builds a whole morality out of itself. Watch how Geto rebuilds himself, and watch the shape of it. He doesn't arrive at I want to create something. He arrives at they should not exist. he starts calling ordinary people monkeys. His new philosophy, a world for sorcerers only, has no positive center. It's defined entirely against an enemy. Every value he now holds is a reaction to what the weak did to him. Nietzsche's line is exact. Noble values, he says, grow from a triumphant yes to oneself. The other kind begins by saying no to what is outside, what is different, and that no is its creative act. It needs a hostile world to exist at all. Erase the enemy, and the whole identity collapses. That is Geto. Not a man who transcended morality. A man whose every belief is a finger pointed at someone else. Here is where he stops being a character in a story. You have done a smaller version of this. Everyone has. You cared about someone. You showed up. You gave more than you got, and you told yourself it didn't matter, because that's what caring is. And then one day they let you down, not dramatically, just enough, and something in you went quiet. And the next time you thought of them, the warmth had a film over it. You started keeping a list. You started noticing what they didn't deserve. You called it seeing them clearly. You called it maturing. You called it protecting yourself. You did not call it what it was. Because Ressentiment never announces itself as bitterness. It always arrives wearing the mask of wisdom. It feels like you finally understand how the world really works. It feels like clarity. That's the disguise, that's the whole trick. The contempt doesn't feel like contempt from the inside. It feels like truth. And the worst part is what it was made of. Your contempt isn't the opposite of your love. It's what your love turned into when it got tired of going unanswered. The colder you've gone toward someone, the more it usually means you once cared and weren't met. Indifference doesn't curdle. Only love does. So when you catch yourself certain that someone doesn't deserve what you used to give freely, stop. That certainty is not your wisdom talking. It might just be your wound, finally learning the words. But here's the objection. And it's stronger than you want it to be. What if Geto was right? Look at the facts of his world. The curses really are made from human ugliness. That's not his opinion, it's the mechanics of reality he lives in. He didn't imagine the rot. He ate it. He knows what ordinary people are made of more intimately than anyone alive. And the crowd really did smile over a dead child. The weak really were, in that moment, exactly as ugly as he came to believe. So maybe calling it Ressentiment is the cheap move. Maybe it's the cowardly one. Because that's the trick you can always pull on someone who says something you don't want to hear. You don't argue with what they said, you psychologize why they said it. You only think that because you're hurt. It's a way of never having to face whether they might be correct. And Nietzsche himself might side with Geto here. Rejecting the rule that you must protect the weak no matter how they behave, refusing to kneel to a morality that demands your endless sacrifice, that's not obviously sickness. Nietzsche called that kind of move a revaluation of values. The thing he admired. So the honest version of this video has to admit it, Geto might have seen something true. The weak can be ungrateful. Compassion can be exploited. The crowd can be exactly as bad as your darkest moment suspects. The question was never whether he was right about them. The question was always about the shape of him. Because here is the thing being right cannot fix. A person who genuinely affirms something builds toward it. The enemy is an afterthought. Geto built nothing. His entire vision was a wall against an enemy, erase the monkeys, and there was no world left over that he actually wanted. Only the absence of them. That's the tell. Not the content of what he believed, the structure. Even if every ugly thing he noticed about the weak was true, his philosophy was still just a wound that had learned to speak in complete sentences. Being correct about someone's ugliness does not make your contempt active instead of reactive. It doesn't change where the value came from. It came from the smile. It always came from the smile. And remember Gojo, the one who didn't break. The difference between them was never strength. They were both monstrously strong. The difference was that Gojo's worth pointed back at himself, and Geto has always pointed out at someone else. Which means Geto never actually had a self to stand on. Only an enemy to define him. First the weak to protect, then the weak to destroy. Either way, his whole existence was borrowed from people he claimed not to need. He thought he'd become a king who rose above the herd. He was the most wounded member of it, calling his own rancor a philosophy. So here is what's left for you. Somewhere in your life there is a person whose smile you have not forgiven. Someone who let you down at the exact moment you'd given them everything. And you've spent the time since then slowly deciding they don't deserve what you used to offer. Maybe you're right about them. That was never the question. The question is what's happening to you while you're right. When your own compassion finally curdles, when people deserve to be saved goes quiet and becomes people aren't worth it, will you call it by its name? Or will you call it growing up?